Okay, in typical Wilcox Women Lori fashion, I read the entire first section of chapter two. Not only did I read that entire first section of chapter two flawlessly, I may add, um, I told a really funny story about how I really screwed up in installment number one's intro when I failed to mention that sister number two was also a dragon, well, is also a dragon lover. Um, so I'm actually going to just pretend that I decided to save that information to share with you today because she is sister number two and we are embarking upon chapter number two. Um, in fact, sister number two is such a great dragon lover that she made me a little ceramic dragon whom I named Ruth. He was maybe about this big and he was white. And if you recall in chapter one, I had mentioned the book series, The Dragon Riders of Pern, and the third book in that series being The White Dragon. The White Dragon is named Ruth, and he picked his own name. So I decided to name my white dragon Ruth. For many, many, many years, Ruth sat on the little shelf right above my sink, or just, kind of to the side of my sink in my kitchen. And so I would see him every day, and I loved that very much. And sister number two, I love you very much. And I apologize that I forgot to mention that you were also a dragon lover, and you made me a really cute little dragon that I love. Okay, so now that I have exposed a few more of my flaws, as you can see, I have many of them. Okay, let's read chapter two. Okay, but I'm going to confess that I'm going to break chapter two into at least two parts because the 17 minutes of the first chapter and my little intro blabbing took 36 hours to upload. Did I mention that my internet is barely above dial-up speed? Okay, anyway, here we go. So chapter two of Dragons Are a Girl's Best Friend by Isla Frost. Check it out. It's a good book. I swore for cathartic purposes and pushed to my feet. My hands were bleeding and my body ached, and I was covered in goop. But, perhaps that slimy layer had protected me from the venom dripping from those tusks, because nothing was burning and nothing stung except where my skin had been scraped off from falling into the sewer. The body cam on my shoulder was cracked, and my boss was not going to be happy about that, but there were 0 casualties, so I considered it a win. Cars were thudding over the upper drain above, apparently deciding that their commute was way more important than preserving the integrity of a crime scene. The noise made me realize what was missing. It was my earpiece. A beam of sunlight was obligingly bouncing off the tunnel wall to reveal where its location was. On the ground, covered in more of that stinky goop. I recovered it and wiped it on the inside of my filthy uniform and shoved it into my ear. I'm fine, I reported to Aurelis, just on the off chance that she was concerned. The walrus thing has returned to its own plane to lick its wounds and would not be able to return unless some other idiot took it into its head to summon it into this one. Have you got the summoner? Yes, and I am growing tired of looking at him, so kindly join us on the street at your earliest convenience. Now, dragons didn't have the vocal cords for human speech, but there was a handy piece of magic tech that spoke for her. Kind of like blanking on his name. Stephen Hawking. But I can't do that mechanical voice, so you're stuck with mine. Dragons didn't have the vocal cords for human speech, but a handy piece of magic tech spoke for her. The recorded voice made her sound even snarkier than she might otherwise, but out of 100 voices to choose from, she had chosen this one. Any trouble? I asked. None. I bit back a second sigh. This was usually how our partnership worked. Being a cop these days was a lot like being a cop before the magic revolution. You still got shoved around and spat on, only now it was by a greater number of species. You'd think that having a dragon for a partner would be advantageous, but even the criminally stupid tended to be smart enough to be intimidated by a dragon, which just meant that all of their vitriol and bodily fluids ended up directed at me. Yet for all of Aurelius's majesty, strength, speed, and intimidation, I was still better than her at some things, like cuffing the criminals, for example. Praise be for opposable thumbs. I hauled myself out of the sewer and dodged the passing traffic. Aurelius was easy to spot on the extra wide sidewalks Las Vegas had been rebuilt with. Her polished copper scales soaked up the hot sun and reflected it back in a way that made me wish for a pair of sunglasses. The guy responsible for this mess was pressed under one clawed foot. He could have still used his magic until I put the special cuffs on him, but the talon by his ear seemed to be giving him some second thoughts. An ambulance sat on the curb a dozen yards away, and 2 uniformed EMTs were talking to the girl and her mother. I limped up the sidewalk, detached my slime-covered cuffs, and slapped them on the summoner. Aurelius did not immediately remove her talon. I really couldn't blame the perp for the wet patch that was at his crotch. My dragon partner may only be 5 feet high at the shoulder, not really any larger than a horse or a polar bear, but when you add in the long, sinewy neck, her even longer tail, the 20-foot wingspan, and then package it in the lethal predatory shape of ancient myth, she felt much, much bigger. I had worked with her nearly every day for 6 months, and I still had to fight back my primordial terror every time she swung the full attention of her gaze my way. Don't piss off the dragon. Her usual comments about eating people who irritated her did not help the situation. In contrast, my average human height and build, paired with blue eyes, brown hair, and a face that tended toward friendly, even when I was hopping mad, was decidedly less intimidating. It was good for interacting with kids and victims, but not so great for facing down monsters or criminals. Why did he do it? I asked. His girlfriend dumped the loser. He says he summoned the monster to get her back, but I'd bet that he wanted to hurt her. Well, that might explain why the walrus thing had fixated on the girl. Sometimes creatures were not really great at grasping more than the very gist of a command. So, get my girlfriend, this is what she looks like, and where she lives might have translated to just get girl. Either way, or the monster was just ignoring the feeble human and decided to take advantage of the world of delicious snacks it had been unleashed upon. I glared down at the guy. No matter what your intention was, you endangered the lives of dozens of civilians, including that little girl over there, and racked up significant damages. This is why summonings must be conducted with a permit under the regulations set out in the Summoner's Handbook. In truth, I was much less concerned about the financial damages than the risk to others' lives. Not just lives of the possible victims, but the lives of those that they would leave behind. I'd been thinking about the finality of death way too often the past few months, wondering how those worlds who were shattered by it managed to go on, how they survived and endured and maybe eventually outmaneuvered the impassable chasm of pain and loss that separated the grieving from those that are truly living. Or was such depthless pain just part of living? The summoner evidently had other concerns. He racked his brain and came up with 3 suggestions for what I might do with the Summoner's Handbook and various parts of my anatomy. I'd learned to enjoy the more creative insults hurled my way, but really none of his were the least bit interesting. I yawned and I suddenly felt exhausted, worn out, worn down, exhausted. Thankfully, the street patrol showed up then and escorted him to the back of their cruiser, which left just my partner around to disparage me. Her nostrils flared. "You smell like a rotting walrus, stewed in sewer water and set upon by a rabble of noxiously flatulent rats. You are not getting on my back smelling like that." I smiled briefly in appreciation. Now that was how to insult someone. "Your tender support is like a breath of fresh air," I told her. "So just excuse me for a moment. I'll be right back." Ignoring Norellis's muttered retort about decidedly unfresh air, I jogged over to the ambulance and squatted down beside the girl. The girl who, by some miracle, had not become a monster snack. It was times like these that made the grueling shifts, the frequent danger, and the isolation from my colleagues all but minor hurdles to overcome. Times like these that made me really love my job. I was learning to clutch them tight whenever I could and to shore me up for the times that were not like this. "Are you okay, sweetie?" The fact that she was still on the sidewalk instead of on a stretcher told me quite a bit already, but I wanted to hear it for myself. She nodded at me with eyes that were almost as wide as when I'd first spotted her beneath the monster, and then she said in an adorably high-pitched voice, "You smell bad." Well, that's gratitude for you. My smile cracked a little. "Yeah, about that. I looked hopefully at the EMTs. I don't suppose either of you have hydro or cleaning magic?" I could get lucky. Those with water-related magic sometimes gravitated toward medical fields because, human bodies were mostly water, and their magic could be useful for diagnostics, if not maybe even healing. And a first responder who was able to magically clean and sterilize a wound could save a lot of medical complications. But today, not in luck. They both shook their heads. One of them winced sympathetically at my malodorous, slime-covered state and offered, "Well, I could spare you an extra large gauze pad?" I tried not to let my shoulders slump as I looked at the proffered item. It was hotter than bad-tempered dragon's breath today, and the slimy, tacky goop would likely set before I got the chance to get into a shower. Dabbing at it with a gauze pad would be about as effectual as dabbing at an ocean of snot with a napkin. "Thanks. Appreciate it. I'll take it." The mother looked like she was having a harder time recovering from shock than the girl, her glassy stare traveling from her daughter to her hands and back again. So I didn't get a thank you from her either. But if I wanted gratitude, I would have chosen a different profession. Like prostitution, for example. I understand there's a lot of gratitude for prostitutes. I walked back to Aurelis and looked around for my hastily discarded motorcycle helmet. I didn't own a motorcycle. But while none of the fictional dragon rider books I'd ever read mentioned the characters choking on bugs or being unable to see a thing because of the wind scouring their eyeballs, the reality was a different story. So I'd given up my chance of being a super cool badass, leaping off of her mighty dragon with my long hair tousled to wind-blown perfection. Yeah, right. And taken to wearing a helmet instead. And unlike the fictional heroines who used motorcycle helmets, when I took it off, I always had helmet hair. Again, kind of like today. And people had once thought that magic was just fantasy. With a grimace, I shoved the clean helmet over my decidedly unclean hair. Aurelia snaked her serpentine neck down to match my eye level. "What part of you are not getting on my back, smelling like rotten walrus, did you not understand?" I resisted the urge to flee and regarded her majestic head coolly. Interlocking copper scales were reinforced by an array of armored ridges and wicked horns that adorned and protected her crown, her neck, and her eyes of liquid gold. She was magnificent. She was alien and fierce. And as always, she evoked wonder and fear in equal measure. But I folded my arms and pretended to be indifferent. The part where you've changed your mind on paperwork? Her slitted pupils contracted, and I knew I'd already won this argument. But, really, I don't mind walking back. If you'd like to fly ahead and get started on the backlog of incident reports, that'd be totally fine with me. Aurelius huffed out a hot steam of air that really would have affected me had I not already put my helmet on. You owe me a voucher to the scale spa, she grumbled. Okay, here we pause for the first installment of chapter 2. We'll be back soon. I hope you're enjoying story time with Lori. And I hope that you're laughing a lot at me. Sister number 2, love you. Talk to you guys soon. Bye.